Welcome back to the Sigma Evolution channel. Tonight we will explore Quizma'S curiosity, the unassuming polymath. When curiosity becomes a system, the man who never stopped asking why. The Quizma rarely looks like the smartest man in the room. That is part of the deception. He does not enter conversations carrying intelligence like a trophy. He does not need everyone to know what he has read, what he has studied, or how many obscure subjects have wandered across his attention over the years. In fact, much of what he knows arrives quietly, accumulated in fragments across hundreds of ordinary moments. A documentary, a conversation, a history book, a psychology lecture, a mechanical failure, a financial mistake, a question about biology, a sentence from philosophy, a pattern in music, a principle from architecture, a story from somebody twice his age, a problem involving technology, a strange detail he noticed 3 years earlier and never completely forgot. To the casual observer, these interests appear unrelated. To the Quizma, they are pieces. He has spent much of his life collecting them. This is where the word polymath becomes useful. A polymath is a person whose knowledge extends across multiple disciplines rather than remaining confined to one narrow field. Historically, polymaths were associated with figures capable of moving between science, art, mathematics, philosophy, engineering, literature, politics, invention, and other branches of knowledge. But the essential quality is not simply knowing many things. Trivia alone does not make a polymath. A warehouse contains thousands of objects and understands none of them. The deeper characteristic is integration. The polymath learns across domains and begins discovering relationships between them. One field illuminates another. Psychology changes how he understands marketing. History changes how he interprets politics. Biology changes how he thinks about competition. Technology changes how he understands communication. Economics changes how he evaluates human incentives. Literature sharpens his sensitivity to motive. Philosophy forces him to examine assumptions. Design teaches him that function and appearance are often negotiating with each other. The Quizma becomes fascinated by these intersections. Not because somebody assigned them, because curiosity keeps opening doors. He is the kind of man who can begin by wondering why people procrastinate and somehow end up reading about dopamine, habit loops, industrial engineering, evolutionary psychology, education systems, attention economics, and the architecture of smartphone notifications. To somebody else, that looks like wandering. Sometimes it is. But eventually, a pattern emerges. The Quizma begins recognizing that knowledge is less like a row of separate houses and more like a city. Everything has roads between it. Most people learn the addresses. The polymath starts studying the traffic. That difference changes the nature of curiosity. When the Quizma was younger, curiosity was largely appetite. He wanted to know. Why does this happen? How does that work? What would happen if? Why does this person behave that way? Why do successful people repeatedly make the same mistake? Why do certain ideas spread while better ones disappear? Why does one environment produce creativity while another destroys it? Questions multiply. And curiosity is rarely tidy. One answer creates 3 new questions. 3 questions create another subject. Another subject produces an unexpected connection. Soon the man who began researching communication is studying anthropology. The man studying anthropology finds himself reading about tribal hierarchy. Hierarchy leads into organizational psychology. Organizational psychology leads into leadership. Leadership leads into military strategy. Military strategy leads into logistics. Logistics leads into systems thinking. Systems thinking leads back to technology. The circle closes. Something clicks. That moment matters. Because the Quizma does not merely accumulate facts. He hunts relationships. This is what separates curiosity from intellectual tourism. Many people visit subjects. The Quizma stays long enough to learn the streets. And staying matters because curiosity has an uncomfortable middle. Almost every new field begins pleasantly. The first stage is exciting because everything is new. New terminology, new ideas, new personalities, new discoveries. The beginner experiences the psychological reward of rapid progress. Every page feels productive because ignorance is enormous and even basic information creates visible improvement. Then comes the middle. The novelty fades. The terminology becomes harder. Contradictions appear. The simple explanations break. The expert introduces exceptions. You realize the subject is larger than you thought. Now progress becomes slower. This is where many people leave. Not because they lack intelligence. Because discovery stops entertaining them. The mind quietly says, "I understand enough." The Quizma hears the same voice. But curiosity has trained him to become suspicious of premature satisfaction. He has learned that the most interesting part of a subject often begins immediately after the point where casual interest dies. So he stays. A little longer. One more chapter. One more interview. One more experiment. One more contradiction. One more connection. This persistence is not discipline in the conventional sense. It is closer to intellectual stubbornness. He has already seen enough half-finished puzzles to know that meaning often appears late. And that changes him. The Sigma once learned to endure physical and psychological difficulty. The Quizma now applies the same endurance to thought. He does not abandon a question simply because the answer stopped arriving quickly. That is where curiosity begins maturing into something more powerful. Not fascination. Understanding. And understanding requires remaining in the room after fascination has gone home. Connecting the disparate. The Quizma's mind becomes most interesting when the subjects stop behaving like separate subjects. He notices correlations. A principle appears in one field. Then again in another. Then again somewhere completely unexpected. Take feedback loops. He encounters them in engineering. A system produces an output, measures the result, then uses that information to adjust future behavior. Simple enough. Then he notices the same principle in biology. Organisms respond to environmental feedback. Then psychology. Behavior is reinforced or discouraged by consequences. Then business. Companies adjust products based on markets. Then relationships. One person's behavior changes another person's behavior, which changes the first person again. Different vocabulary. Same underlying architecture. The Quizma pauses. That pause is where the polymath begins. He starts asking whether certain principles are universal beneath their specialized language. Competition. Adaptation. Scarcity. Signaling. Hierarchy. Incentives. Entropy. Feedback. Risk. Selection. Leverage. Redundancy. These ideas appear everywhere. The fields change their clothing. But the bones remain surprisingly familiar. This is how he begins connecting dots most people were never taught to place on the same page. Consider evolutionary biology and business. An organism survives by adapting to environmental pressure. A company survives by adapting to market pressure. Neither receives a permanent exemption because it was once successful. The environment moves. Adapt or decline. Now consider psychology and cybersecurity. The weakest point in many systems is not the machinery. It is the human being. Trust can be exploited. Urgency can override judgment. Authority can suppress skepticism. The same vulnerabilities that make manipulation possible in relationships can make social engineering possible in computer security. Different arena. Same nervous system. Or consider music and conversation. Timing matters. Silence matters. Rhythm matters. Too much sound becomes noise. Too much speech does too. The person who understands the pause often controls more of the emotional tempo than the person filling every second with language. Architecture teaches another lesson. A structure must distribute weight. So must a life. Put every demand on one support beam and eventually something cracks. Finance teaches diversification. Psychology teaches emotional range. Ecology teaches interdependence. Engineering teaches redundancy. Different disciplines keep arriving at variations of the same warning. Do not build a complicated system around a single point of failure. The Quizma notices, then begins applying. This is why his curiosity eventually becomes practical. He is not merely interested in knowing more. He wants ideas that travel, concepts capable of surviving transplantation. If something works in one domain, he asks whether the principle might work somewhere else. Sometimes the answer is no. That matters too. A mature polymath does not force similarities simply because they are elegant. Correlation is not identity. Metaphor is not proof. Patterns can mislead. The Quizma learns this through intellectual bruises. He becomes excited about a connection, tests it, finds the analogy collapses halfway through. Good. Something has been learned. Curiosity without skepticism becomes gullibility. Skepticism without curiosity becomes stagnation. The Quizma tries to preserve both. Open enough to explore, disciplined enough to verify. This balance becomes increasingly important because knowledge creates its own ego traps. The more subjects a person studies, the easier it becomes to mistake familiarity for expertise. The Quizma becomes aware of this danger. Knowing the vocabulary of economics does not make him an economist. Reading neuroscience does not make him a neuroscientist. Understanding basic legal concepts does not make him an attorney. A polymath is not a man pretending to possess every profession. He is a man developing enough intellectual fluency across domains to understand their principles, recognize their boundaries, and connect them responsibly. That humility is essential. Otherwise, breadth becomes performance. The Quizma wants synthesis, not applause. So he becomes comfortable saying, I know enough about this to recognize the pattern. I do not know enough to pretend mastery. That sentence protects him. The truly curious mind eventually learns how enormous ignorance is. Every discipline resembles a coastline. From a distance, it looks manageable. Walk toward it and the detail multiplies. The closer you get, the larger it becomes. This realization does not discourage the Quizma. It energizes him. There will always be another question, another discipline, another bridge. And because he moves between them, he begins developing an advantage specialists sometimes lack. Perspective. The specialist sees deep. The polymath sees across. Neither is inherently superior. Depth solves certain problems. Breadth solves others. But when complexity crosses disciplinary boundaries, the ability to move between perspectives becomes unusually valuable. Modern problems often do exactly that. A technological problem may also be psychological. A financial problem may involve culture. A health policy problem may involve economics, communication, statistics, politics, and human behavior. A business problem may look like marketing while actually being product design. The Quizma learns not to trust the label on the box. He opens it, looks inside. Sometimes the stated problem is only the visible symptom. His curiosity keeps asking a dangerous question. What else could this be? That question expands the search. And eventually, patterns begin revealing themselves. The Quizma starts noticing that many breakthroughs are not completely new inventions. They are old principles introduced into unfamiliar territory. Borrowed power. Recombined. A concept from one field solves a problem in another because nobody previously thought to invite the disciplines into the same room. This is where the Quizma feels most at home. At the intersection. The borderland. The place where psychology meets technology. Where philosophy meets strategy. Where biology meets behavior. Where art meets communication. Where history meets prediction. Where statistics meet skepticism. He does not always know what he will discover. That is precisely why he stays curious. The unassuming polymath is not wandering aimlessly through knowledge. He is searching for bridges. And every now and then, he finds one nobody else noticed because they were too busy staying inside their own lane. The difference between interest and discovery. Curiosity looks impressive at the beginning. Discovery rarely does. The beginning is glamorous. A new book arrives. A fresh subject opens. A documentary creates fascination. You learn 10 ideas in an evening and suddenly feel as if another section of the universe has switched on its lights. Then the honeymoon ends. The language thickens. The theories disagree. The beginner-friendly explanations disappear. The questions become technical. Progress becomes difficult to measure. And slowly, many people lose interest. The book closes. The course stalls. The notes disappear into a folder. The curiosity that felt urgent 3 weeks earlier becomes another abandoned intellectual construction site. This pattern fascinates the Quizma because he recognizes something deeper inside it. People do not always quit because the subject became boring. Sometimes they quit because they stopped feeling intelligent while learning it. The early stage rewards you constantly. The intermediate stage humiliates you. Now you know enough to understand how little you know. Psychologists sometimes describe something related through the progression from unconscious incompetence toward conscious incompetence and eventually competence. The unpleasant stage is awareness. You can finally see the mountain. And it is much taller than the brochure suggested. This is where mature curiosity separates itself from novelty seeking. The Quizma stays. Not forever. He is capable of abandoning dead ends. That is different. But he resists leaving merely because learning stopped flattering him. He has developed patience with confusion. That may be one of the Polymath's least celebrated skills. Confusion is information. It marks the border between your current model and reality. Most people experience confusion as failure. The Quizma increasingly treats it as a location. Here. This is where I stopped understanding. Now investigate. He reads another explanation. Looks for an example. Finds a competing theory. Breaks the concept into smaller pieces. Returns to fundamentals. And occasionally, after days or weeks of scattered effort, something reorganizes. The pieces connect. A concept he learned months earlier suddenly illuminates the new one. Two subjects snap together. And there it is. Meaning. This moment can be difficult to describe because discovery is often less dramatic than people imagine. No orchestra. No lightning. Sometimes it is simply a quiet realization while washing dishes. Wait. That sounds like. And the mind moves backward. Retrieves another idea. Compares structures. Tests similarity. The connection holds. The Quizma stops. Looks again. Now something he understood in isolation has become part of a larger system. This is knowledge maturing. Facts becoming structure. Structure becoming insight. Insight becoming judgment. The Quizma begins understanding that intelligence is not primarily the possession of information. Information has become cheap. A phone can retrieve more factual material in seconds than generations of scholars could carry in entire libraries. The advantage is no longer merely having access. The advantage is knowing what matters, what connects, what contradicts, what transfers, what deserves skepticism, what question should be asked next. This is why the Quizma's curiosity becomes increasingly selective with age. Young curiosity wants everything. Mature curiosity begins recognizing leverage. Some questions open rooms. Others open buildings. Some ideas explain one phenomenon. Others explain hundreds. The Quizma starts searching for concepts with explanatory power. He becomes attracted to first principles, underlying mechanisms, patterns that appear repeatedly beneath different surfaces. He asks, what is actually happening here? What assumption is everyone making? What variable changed? What incentive is driving the behavior? What would have to be true for this explanation to fail? Where have I seen this structure before? These questions function like intellectual crowbars. They pry assumptions loose. And somewhere in this process, the Quizma's polymathic nature begins affecting his social intelligence too. People become another interdisciplinary puzzle. He hears someone discussing business and recognizes psychology underneath it. Someone talks about relationships and he hears incentives. Someone discusses politics and he notices tribal identity. Someone describes success and he recognizes survivorship bias. Someone explains failure and he sees systems. He listens on multiple levels. Not because every conversation requires analysis. Sometimes a sandwich is merely lunch. But the capacity remains. This makes the Quizma difficult to intellectually corner. He has more than one lens. If the economic explanation fails, he tries psychology. If psychology seems insufficient, he considers culture. If culture cannot explain the anomaly, perhaps history can. Maybe technology changed the environment. Maybe statistics reveal the perceived pattern is not real at all. He rotates the object. Another angle. Another discipline. Another possibility. That flexibility mirrors his street evolution. Episode 4 showed a man learning to move through physical and social terrain. Episode 5 reveals that his mind moves the same way. He does not remain trapped inside one intellectual neighborhood. He crosses town. The same curiosity that once made him notice people now makes him notice systems. The same endurance that carried him through hardship now carries him through difficult ideas. The same wolf-like instinct that once detected movement in the environment now detects patterns inside information. Survival has evolved again. The wolf once listened for danger in the forest. The Quizma listens for structure inside noise. And this is where the unassuming polymath finally earns the description. Not because he knows everything. Quite the opposite. Because he has become permanently aware that everything connects to something he does not yet understand. That awareness keeps arrogance from closing the door. Curiosity opens it again. He studies, questions, compares, tests, leaves, returns, connects. And often, just beyond the point where somebody else became bored, tired, or satisfied with the first explanation, the Quizma finds the thread. He pulls. Another idea moves. Then another. The dots begin forming a shape. And suddenly the scattered subjects no longer look scattered. They were part of the same map. He simply had to remain curious long enough to see it. Conclusion. The Sigma learned independence. The street taught him adaptability. Curiosity taught him expansion. And the polymathic mind taught him something even more valuable. Knowledge becomes powerful when it stops living in separate rooms. The Quizma studies broadly, but he does not collect information merely to sound informed. He studies psychology beside technology, history beside strategy, biology beside behavior, philosophy beside real life. He compares them, challenges them, looks for repeating architecture. Most people begin the journey of discovery with enthusiasm. Then the road becomes difficult. Novelty fades. Understanding slows. Confusion arrives. And they leave before the landscape begins making sense. The Quizma stays another mile. Not because every subject deserves endless pursuit, but because he has learned that insight often hides immediately beyond the point where curiosity becomes work. That is the advantage of the mature mind. It does not merely ask questions. It remains present long enough for the answers to become connected. And once the dots connect, something changes. Information becomes knowledge. Knowledge becomes understanding. Understanding becomes judgment. And judgment becomes something Google cannot simply hand you. Wisdom. But there is a danger hidden inside all this intelligence. The more patterns a man recognizes, the easier it becomes to believe he can read every situation correctly. Curiosity can create wisdom. It can also create overconfidence. So what happens when the Quizma must learn the difference between seeing a pattern and imagining one? When intuition collides with bias? When the man who prides himself on reading the room discovers that even a sophisticated mind can deceive itself? That is where the next stage of evolution begins. Episode 6. The Quizma's blind spot. When intelligence argues with itself. Comment below with one subject you started exploring that unexpectedly led you into another field entirely. And subscribe to the Sigma Evolution channel so you do not miss the next stage of the Quizma's evolution. Because the smartest man in the room is rarely the one with the most answers. Sometimes it is simply the man who never stopped asking the better question.